get here. I'm really looking forward to this. I read that paper. It's really interesting, and I'm really looking forward to doing this program. Thanks a lot for coming.
Oh, you're welcome.
My good pleasure to welcome you, and things are looking good. And welcome very much to Conversation. A pleasure to welcome to Conversations Bruce Gilchrist, and he's a person who's been involved in computing for a very long time. He's got a very interesting story to tell. I might just say, parenthetically, we both belong to one of the Columbia University seminars run by Seth Negroshell, Computers, Man, and Society. And Bruce Gilchrist has been involved in that realm for a very long time. He was former Director of Computing Activity for Columbia University. And Bruce, welcome very, very much to Conversations.
Thank you.
My great good pleasure to welcome you to the program, and I wonder if you could bear with me, if you could share some of your own background, where you were born and raised and educated, and then how, as a way of sort of, in a sense, wading into it, and then talking some about early computing efforts that you were involved in and so forth. But could you share your own background, please?
Okay, I was born in England and educated there. I went to all the way through grade school, high school in England. Then I went to the University of London, to the Imperial College of Science and Technology, which in some ways might be regarded as akin to the MIT of England, and where we had it was right after the Second World War, so courses were intense, so I ended up studying mathematics and completing a degree course in 2 years because those of us from high school, director of high school, represented maybe 10% of the class. The rest were ex-service people who had served, who had been at the rank of anywhere from private to colonel. So it was it was an unusual situation.
Now, you would not have served in the war, in the Second War. You would have been too young for that.
I was too young.
But you do remember it.
Oh, yes.
Were you in London during the Blitz?
No,
and
I
so
was
forth?
about 100 miles north of London. We
Coventry or?
No, I was in a place called King's Lynn on the East Coast. We heard all the aircraft going over to bomb Coventry, and occasionally they would, if they hadn't found a place to drop their bombs, they'd drop them on King's Lynn on their way home.
I see.
Or a few scaredy cats would drop them on King's Lynn and go home straight away.
I see.
So the high school I went to was bombed. We lost the top floors of the school.
Really?
That was done at night, so it wasn't when we were in class. But
that period of the Battle of Britain and so forth was really a very testy time.
Oh, yes.
Not? Yeah.
And, you know, I was a teenager, and you
of course.
remember what goes on. And I had a brother, a half-brother, who was evacuated from France through Dunkirk.
I see.
So we had a sort of a family interest in the war efforts. So I ended up at Imperial College studying mathematics, and there was a requirement at the university that we have 3 years of study before we could actually receive a bachelor's degree.
I see.
I passed all the exams at the end of 2.
You were sort of ahead of the curve.
Ahead of the curve, so I had to do something for the at least the 3rd year. So I moved up in the same building to the meteorology department because they were starting to get interested in the mathematics of meteorology.
You had a mathematical bent then?
Yes.
Yeah. And when you said high school, I wonder if you could do that, because I'm not familiar, but they have a thing in England, grammar school, or they have a sixth form, and so forth, and high school is, you had gone to grammar school?
Well, be careful. I'm sorry, because I'm sort of 2 cultures muddled up now.
Oh, yeah, you're an American citizen since 57, I noted,
The system in effect then was very selective.
Yes.
At the age of 11, you took what was called the 11 plus.
Yes.
And you were either a sheep or a goat after that.
I see.
And if you went, ignore the whole private school system, which are called public schools in England,
really,
just to confuse matters.
Confuse things even more, and you drive on the wrong side of the street, I've noticed.
Something like that.
Yeah, right.
So I then went to what was called a grammar school, which took the top 10% or so of the young people. And then you stay there for 5 years and take what was then the 15, 16-year-old examination. If you did well enough then, you could stay on for the final 2 years, which are known as a sixth form.
That's sixth form, yeah.
And it was from there, then a very small minority went from there to the university.
And traditionally, there had been a very small percentage of the population went to university.
It was.
Yeah.
Now it is a lot different.
It's going more like America now?
It's much more.
More democratic in a sense?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
But it was, you were in the period where you had been carefully winnowed out.
I don't know. Yes, I mean, I'm sure a lot of people who should have gone to the university didn't go.
Yeah, you have that thing over there now called the Open University, the British Open University.
That is
Walter Perry
basically a mail order. I mean, it's done partly through television, partly self-study, and a few weeks of on-site study. They offer very good courses, and they've enabled a lot of people to get educated later on in life. And when I was in school as a teenager, if you didn't make it through the 11-year-old and the 11 plus exam, it was really very difficult.
Yeah, you were to be an auto mechanic or something.
That's right.
Yeah,
And now there's many more comprehensive schools where they have all the students there. I'm no expert on the British educational system as it is now, but I have a feeling it's a lot better.
You survived through it, though, and got through and came out at the top end, as it were.
Right. Well, if you come out in the top end, you're lucky.
Yeah, right. It's an
time,
elitist matter. The university was an elitist matter, and you were able to be in part of that. Your family setting, was it encouraged, the intellectual was so forth at the dinner table?
Yeah,
was it
well,
educationally?
my father had died when I was 10.
Oh, yeah.
He had been a career postal official, rising to middle management, and he had left school at the age of 12 and had no education beyond 12, except that he joined the post office as a messenger boy and then went into telegraphy and took various examinations and studied telegraphy. And then he moved into management. And one story I like to tell about my father, who I never really didn't know that well because I was only 10 when he died.
My father died when I was only 13, so we have a similarity in that.
He was probably the oldest and least educated officer in the British Army in the First World War.
Wow, okay.
He had been born in 1872, so he was, in 1914, if I do the arithmetic right, he was 42.
Yeah.
But he had a skill the Army needed of telegraphy, because
that was the new thing.
The new thing.
And so, gotten past carrier pigeons,
they asked him and his brother, who had about the same sort of background, if they would serve, and they bypassed the educational requirement. At that time, you really had to go to a respectable private school to become an officer.
I see. And, right. But that's part of that class thing, right?
My father and his brother had, as I say, left school at 12, and they settled. The Army, in their need, settled for a letter from their minister saying that they were of good character.
Okay, good. Yeah.
And so he became a temporary second lieutenant. Despite being decorated for valor, he never rose above a lieutenant.
Well, lieutenant. But I never rose above PFC in the American Army, but that's not the same, I think.
Yeah, but I mean, I think my father was clearly out of his class in the Army.
Anyway, you were talking about your education. You went to university and so, and then I read a little memoir you'd written about some of and it was about early computing and so on. And you said you first heard about this thing, computing or computers, that you became interested in a stroll with somebody who was a neighbor's son or something.
My next door neighbor, the son was a little bit older than me. He was about 4 years older. But around 1949 or so, I was in college. I think I just started college. And he had been in the Army and then went as an engineering student to Cambridge. And during vacation, he and I used to go for long walks together. And he was telling me about he told me about the computer that was being built.
First time you'd ever heard tell of it.
This was really the first time.
And it didn't hardly exist in the real world.
That's right.
Right.
And that sort of stuck in my mind. I didn't do anything about it, but clearly, since I was, taking courses involved in applied mathematics, which does involve some computation.
Yes,
It sounded like an interesting sort of thing.
You had another thing, if I may, in there. You were talking about the term computer, which we use so much now, used to refer to a lot of, it was usually young women or women who would be computers. It was like a job title.
Right.
And they would be doing some entering of data or something or
Well,
something?
some of them would be actually turning a handle on hand-cranked calculators.
Right. And they were called, that was a job, like you got a janitor, you got the CEO or something, you got a computer.
Right.
And that was the name of a job title.
Yes, yes.
And that's where we got the term computer from.
Right.
That now applies to so much of the world's information and so
Right.
forth. Yeah.
So
that was interesting to me, yeah.
That I heard about computers, or a computer from Lewis Martin. And then, as I say, after I graduated, after I completed my exams for a bachelor's degree, I had to spend a year doing something in the college.
Right.
To complete my residence requirements. So I went up to the meteorology department, where they had a man by the name of Eric Eady, who was very interested in the application of mathematics to weather forecasting.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, right. Okay.
And so
and you were sort of beginning to get interested in the idea of computation and
Yes.
computers and so forth.
and so
From a scientific background.
Right.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
And so I spent the next 2 years in the meteorology department, and I did a large amount of hand calculations.
Yes.
I mean, I was lucky I got a thesis topic very quickly because it was a new field.
Yes. Uh-huh.
And I did a lot of computation, but along the lines, we started talking about how much better it would be if we had a computer to help us.
A computer.
Yeah.
That would be a person.
No,
No,
a thing.
Oh, when did it pass from being a job title to
I don't
a
really
thing?
know.
You
I don't really know.
But it would have been. This was in the early stages.
It was
of
it was in the 1950 era.
1950 or
And
even the 40s.
we had, there was a computer being built at Imperial College out of relays.
relays.
Relays, you know, like phone relays.
Okay.
And so I got into, Eric Eady and I got a little involved with that because we were interested. We wanted to find out about what was going on. But we realized that they really weren't going to be sufficient. It wasn't going to be sufficiently powerful
to be useful.
to be useful for our purposes.
And you were applying it to weather.
to weather prediction.
And you were studying, in a certain sense, meteorology.
Yes, absolutely.
And there was a combination of the computing capability and taking that as a thing, a way in which you could approach the use of computers in order to make good computation on weather.
Yes.
And meteorology was your field.
Yes.
You got a degree in that.
Yes.
And your PhD was in meteorology?
Right.
That's very
Although my
interesting.
thesis was all mathematics.
It was mathematics, and you were coming out of mathematical background. Yeah.
And in the summer of 1951, I think it was, Edie and I heard about a course that Professor Wilkes at Cambridge was giving on the machine, which was now complete, which I had heard about, you know, a couple of years earlier from my neighbor.
Your stroll through the
And so I went on a 2-week course at Cambridge in the summer. I think it was the summer of 51.
51. Okay.
And the EDSAC at Cambridge was working, and so
that was the number or the
Name.
acronym for the
Yes.
computer, right?
yes.
This is all very early stuff.
Oh yes.
Yeah.
And so I learned I wrote my first computer program in the summer of
Didn't
51.
I see in your memoir you said that you had, as part of that course, what was the first book on what would be called programming?
Right.
You were right in on the ground
Yes.
floor of the
And
gestation.
it was an interesting course because it was new to everybody.
Yes,
and,
indeed.
So that was, however, I didn't really have any way of using the information directly for my thesis because I had to get computations done, and so I did them by hand.
You were ahead of the technological curve.
Yes.
As now the technological curve may be ahead of us. But
Absolutely.
That,
And so that was really the story then goes to the spring of 1952.
if I may, you took your PhD in meteorology.
Right.
Okay. And you had to do you couldn't do a lot with the computing history of your life and so forth because you were doing all the things you had to do to get the dissertation done and everything. Yeah, right.
But it clearly, by the summer of 1951, we were well aware that the computer was going to be necessary if we were going to do significant work in numerical meteorology.
Did you have glimpses of anything like what has emerged at that early stage when you were aware of some of the philosophical basis for the computing industry and so forth? Or were there things coming from across the ocean, America? Were there things going on? Norbert Wiener, these kind of things?
I remember going to a lecture by Norbert Wiener on cybernetics. He was a visitor at Imperial College, and Edie and I went over and heard him talk.
Do you remember your impression?
I thought it was interesting. That was 60 years ago, almost 60 years ago, and I would hate to be examined on it at the moment.
I know. Yeah.
But the
I have a friend of mine. He happens to be an investment banker. He took the AOL public. Is that what they say? But his dad was a scholar, Ptolemy, a real scholar. And Mark claims that his dad was in the room with about a dozen people when they coined the term cyber. There were 12 people or 10 or something, and they came up with the word cyber, which is like steersman.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know the history of that word.
But that was about 1948.
It was probably, that sounds right.
And you were in on the ground floor of this whole thing that's destined to change the whole world at the very beginning, and maybe didn't realize that, but that's what I was just making that point.
But my luck changed really in the spring of 52 when we had a visitor to the department, Jules Charney, who was at the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton.
Wow.
And he'd been hired by John von Neumann to run a meteorology group because von Neumann, who was building a computer, felt that weather prediction was a very challenging task and one which would need a computer and would really test out the ability to build a computer that was useful.
That was the Van Neumann.
Yes.
He was a real pioneer.
Absolutely. So I remember very clearly we took Edie and myself and one other graduate student took Jules Charney to lunch at the Rembrandt Hotel in South Kensington, which was just around the corner from the college.
All right.
And Jules showed us some early results they got. The Institute machine had just started to be useful.
I see.
And he showed us some code and some results that preliminary results they'd gotten, and which was all very exciting because we got to talking, and the subject, I don't know quite whether I brought it up or Edie brought it up, that I was finishing my degree shortly and was looking around for what to do next. So Charney very graciously said, well, why don't you think about coming to visit us at Princeton?
What a wonderful idea.
So, they
started rationing and whatnot in England, so it would have been,
I mean, he didn't offer me any money, but said, look, we would support, he and von Neumann would support a grant application. So I duly applied for a Fulbright and what was then known as a Smith-Mundt Award. And fortunately, with the backing of von Neumann, I think it was, as I think I said in the memoir, it's not what you know, it's who you know in some of these cases.
And luck helps too a lot of times,
And so in September of 1952, I sailed on the Queen Mary.
Oh, wonderful. That's when we used to have to take ships across the ocean.
Absolutely.
It was wonderful, really.
It was my first experience of no rationing.
Yes.
And so in September of 1952, I joined the meteorology group at the Institute for Advanced Study.
Now, you have a biography, and I wonder if, a memoir and everything, and we got a picture here of John von Neumann in an IAS machine?
Yeah, Institute for Advanced Study machine.
Okay, let's see if we can. It's going to take him a while to come in. Let's have this picture come in just to set it. This is a picture of John, and that's from the Institute of Advanced Studies at Princeton. I guess there was Mr. Einstein there then?
Einstein was there at the time.
Mm-hmm.
That machine has about the capability of a washing machine today. I mean, in terms of the computing capability, but it was a big machine.
Uh-huh.
And well, all machines were big.
Yeah.
But it worked.
Were they using vacuum tubes?
This was vacuum tubes and cathode ray tubes for the memory.
Uh-huh. And this is pre-transistor or anything
This
like
is way pre-transistor.
much less microchip or anything.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
We didn't know anything about that.
Right. But this is a computing device and so forth. And this was at Princeton?
It's at Princeton. It is now in the Smithsonian in Washington.
And you were there with him?
Yes.
And
yes.
you went there, and how did you find the Institute for Advanced Studies in 1952?
It was a wonderful place because it had been set up in the 30s when academic positions were hard to get in terms of, and especially to have time to do research.
Right, your own research. Yeah.
Yes, and so there were two major schools. There was School of Historical Studies and the School of Mathematics.
At the IAS?
At the Institute. Von Neumann, who was a brilliant mathematician,
yes,
had been involved with computing during the war.
Hadn't they done a lot of war games things and so forth?
He had done things like that, but he'd also been involved in computing at Los Alamos in support of the atomic bomb.
Right.
And he was aware of the computer developments which were going on at the University of Pennsylvania, supported by the Army.
Okay.
And so at the end of the war, he got the Institute to agree to allow him to form a group to build a computer. It wasn't that popular with the theoreticians.
Okay.
But von Neumann's reputation was such that...
Absolutely, he was a giant. Yeah.
He was really a giant in many fields. And so...
Very well connected with the government.
Oh, yes. And then he set up the system. It was fairly slow getting built, as many academic things are.
Yes.
He had support from the Army, Navy, and Air Force.
Okay.
And
Marines didn't chip in.
The Marines didn't chip in.
All right, yeah.
And by the time I got there in September of 1952, it was working pretty well. The engineers, though, had it most of the daytime, and we used to work all night trying to solve problems.
Was that the one, I'm not sure if you're getting ahead of the curve here, that they had, it was the IBM you were with for a while.
Oh, that was later.
And that's where they gave a discount, and they had to do a 30% discount if you did educational, 30% on another educational thing, and you had to meet that. That's ahead of what we're talking about.
Way later.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
And
it's a really interesting memoir you've written, yeah.
We actually did a great deal. It was a very small capability machine, but we used a lot of tricks and actually succeeded in making primitive weather predictions, which appeared to make sense.
All right.
And in fact, it made enough sense.
That you could not have done by hand calculations? Or
it would have taken far too long.
All right. Yeah.
They were sufficiently good that the government, in the form of the Weather Bureau and the Armed Services, set up in the mid-1950s a joint numerical weather prediction unit to develop working weather prediction.
Okay.
And that unit is still functioning.
Really? Okay.
Oh, yes. Yeah. And it's doing, most of the weather predictions you get are using techniques which at least started. I mean, lots of things have changed over the 40 years, 50 years, but you can still recognize some of the things.
Yeah.
We had a very interesting...
You were in the very real sense, in on the ground floor with some of the giants building what was to become the computing marvel that's changed the whole world.
Yeah, it was fun.
Yeah,
I mean, it was, I mean,
you had a good time in Princeton, didn't you?
Oh yeah, we worked hard. I mean, we lost a lot of sleep because if the engineers had it during the day, I mean, we would typically, I'd sometimes one of my colleagues go to the movies in the evening, and then we'd go to work. Then we'd go into the machine room about 10 o'clock when the engineers were finished.
Yeah, that's right.
And it would work until the next morning,
yes.
until they came in again.
Right. But it was all, and you were engaged. You were really engaged at it. Yeah,
it's fun when you're doing that, and we didn't have all the programming tools that you have today. We programmed in what was called machine language.
There was no Fortran?
There's no Fortran.
Yeah, Fortran, yeah.
And I mean, it was obviously a lot harder, and it wasn't a tool for everybody because you really had to know a lot about the computer to use it.
Was it very good to be mathematically based?
Probably.
Yeah.
And, well, all of us were
Yes.
who were involved.
Yeah.
But we understood the problems, I think, very well because we had to get into the details of them in order to get them solved, and we couldn't. I mean, there was a joke later around about aircraft designers, designing aircraft when they really didn't know what the computer was doing with the design, commenting about floating point errors and so forth. And do you really want to fly on a plane which was designed by a computer?
Well, we're doing an awful lot of things that are designed by a
we're also
computer now.
computers are a lot better.
The computer are qualitatively
Yes.
better. This is the beginning. The major challenge, the idea of programming, you said there was no Fortran. These things were to develop into the time ahead, and I know you did spend time at IBM and so forth.
Again, that was later. IBM, during the time I was at the Institute, IBM was starting to get quite interested in computers and involved.
Right.
Von Neumann was a consultant to IBM in the early 50s.
You had a lot of things early on that were government-based because they had it wasn't really able to be seen as such applicability even for for business application and so forth like IBM was destined to do. Well, I presume it was research development based and so forth.
I think early on, IBM had a dominating position in the punch card industry.
Okay.
And but they saw the computer as having mainly be for scientific uses. They didn't see the immediate market. I mean, they saw it fairly quickly, but not at the very beginning. Interestingly enough, the first people I think to recognize the commercial importance of computers was Lyons tea shops in England.
Really?
This is an interesting story. Lyons was I don't know whether you know anything about Lyons tea shops.
Well, I've just been there a couple of times, but I don't know anything.
They were, in the 30s, they were a massive chain of restaurants.
Restaurants,
primarily in London. And they had...
L-Y-O-N.
Yes.
Yeah.
And they had a very forward-thinking chief executive who had a fairly powerful methods group because he felt that, you've got to understand how supplies move and, how you wanted to make a nickel. You had a very small profit, but you had a lot of items moving around.
Right. You had some just-in-time thinking and that kind of stuff.
So right after the war, he sent two of his people to the States to find out what was going on with this newfangled computer.
And where would he go in the States to find that out?
Well, he went to the University of Pennsylvania. They went to various places. I don't know everywhere where they went.
Yeah, okay.
But one of the people they did talk to was Hermann Goldstein, who was von Neumann's #2 person at the Institute.
You became associated with him.
Yes, I was a very good friend of Hermann's. And Hermann told them, well, you really should look closer to home. Go talk to Maurice Wilkes at Cambridge University because he's building a computer. So they went back home, went to see Wilkes. Who,
like Dorothy goes back to Kansas.
And simultaneously with the construction of Wilkes completing the EDSAC at Cambridge, the Lyons people built a computer called Leo. Which they used for commercial purposes. And in fact, for a while, they actually manufactured quite a few of
for sale to others?
They did it for sale to others.
No kidding, really.
And,
it was called Leo.
It was called
Leo. For lions, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
But it's...
But what was that? You had an acronym or something? It was a computer that was being built there? It was called a what?
EDSAC at Cambridge.
EDSAC.
Yes. EDSAC.
Did that stand for something?
Yes, but I don't remember. It's one of those things.
That was one of those
acronym
precursors almost. Yeah,
it was the early. It had an interesting memory. They had large tanks of mercury, and the speed of sound in mercury is slower than is fairly slow.
Okay.
So they had pulses going down these mercury tanks
Uh-huh.
and essentially circulating in the tank of mercury.
Uh-huh.
And they could set it up so the pulse streams could be read, and you could have ones and zeros.
Uh-huh.
And
To get your binary thing, yeah.
yeah. But obviously you need a rather large amount of mercury for a limited amount of memory.
There was a whole lot of things going on that had to be sort of, in a sense, improvised and built from the ground up and everything, I guess, in a sense.
But
you were in that phase or in that
I
milieu.
knew about it. I really wasn't involved in that much in the engineering. I did a little bit of machine design in my spare time at Princeton, and wrote a couple of papers with the chief engineer. But that was not my forte. I'm not an electrical engineer.
No. But you were coming out of mathematics, and you had this, and you had the meteorology, and then you also had met people. And how long were you at the Institute for Advanced
I ended
Study?
up being there 4 years.
That must have been a grand 4 years.
Yes. And then, unfortunately, after about 2 years, von Neumann went first of all to the Atomic Energy Commission, and then he died shortly thereafter.
I see.
As a relatively, he was only in his 50s.
Really?
And after that, clearly the Institute lost interest in computing because the theoreticians said, "What are we doing with this thing now? Johnny isn't here."
Now that Johnny isn't here, isn't that interesting? Yeah.
And so they ended up transferring the computer to the university, which is entirely separate from the institute.
I see. Okay.
And the rest of us dispersed.
I see. Yeah. Right.
And so.
But the institute still stayed.
Oh yes. Oh yeah. And they now are quite interested in computing.
I should think so. Isn't everyone? Yeah. Right.
And so.
Did you have a glimpse of that? You could see from that period anything like what's happened?
Oh, we had discussions about what was going on, and.
You didn't know that was pre-transistor?
It was pre-transistor, and
that was going to change everything.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we had little visions, but we didn't
have the big vision.
I'm not sure anybody had the complete vision.
Yeah.
Of what would happen. So then, when the group broke up. I was offered a position at Syracuse University to set up a computing center. And at that time, IBM had produced a computer which was called the IBM 650.
650.
Which was a magnetic drum computer. And the memory was a magnetic drum. And they did what was, in retrospect, one of their brilliant marketing things, in that they told universities that if you will teach about computing, we will give you significant discounts. And they, as you said earlier...
That was IBM?
IBM.
Yeah, that's the one I think.
They would give 30% discount for teaching courses about computing.
They wanted to see the educational
and
potential.
And 30% more if you had something about business.
That's 60% off, right? That's a pretty good
60%
deal.
off. And so we...
taught a lot of things having to do with
we wanted to anyway.
Yeah, right, okay,
right. So along with many other universities, Syracuse went into this deal. And I mean, around New York, nearby to Syracuse, we had Rochester had one, Cornell had one, Buffalo had a 650. So we had a whole community.
Now you're talking a year what? What year would this have been?
That was in 1956.
56, okay.
And so I helped get one of the early university computing centers going. And I taught computing to both students and to faculty. And that was again on the ground floor.
The whole field was emerging around you.
Yes.
That would be very interesting.
Yeah, this was interesting.
Yeah, right.
And we exchanged a lot of ideas. We set up an annual get-together of computing center directors. So we exchanged ideas every summer. And it was a time when people weren't patenting things, and everything was a free exchange.
Exchange code, so open source. Huh?
It was really open, and so you got an idea from somewhere, or you thought about something after the meeting, and so you'd call Joe up at podunk.
3 in the morning or
and
something?
they say, you know, what
Yeah.
about can you give me a piece of code?
That's nice. Isn't
And
it?
yeah, and it was a very friendly arrangement. And
the standards were there as far as the code and the writing and the programming and everything were
well, we
developing.
were experimenting.
Were there competitions between various notions of how that should be set up, the architecture and so forth? Or was
Yes,
it?
it was struggling. IBM had developed Fortran. The University of Michigan had developed some programming languages. Bell Labs had some interesting work going on, which again they shared freely with people.
But these things could inter-accommodate these various systems. Excuse my ignorance.
It was primarily because we were using this. IBM started to dominate the field, so we were all by that stage using, you know, IBM equipment.
Okay.
Now it wasn't 100% IBM because there was still Univacs around and that, and there were other people, but it was, you know, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs.
I see. Right.
So I spent three years in Syracuse and then got recruited by IBM Research, where Herman Goldstein had gone.
That's who you had mentioned earlier.
Been with me at Princeton.
And you became lifelong friends with him.
Oh yeah. Well, that was from when I first went to Princeton.
Yeah.
And so I joined him at IBM Research to run the computing side. He was in charge of mathematics.
Okay.
And computing, and I was recruited to run the computing part for IBM Research.
Oh, I see. Okay.
And
where was that located?
That was in Yorktown Heights.
Okay.
Although when I first joined IBM in '59, the computers for research were still in Poughkeepsie.
I see.
So I did a lot of driving between Yorktown Heights and Poughkeepsie,
okay.
Which is an hour's trip.
Right.
And so that was really.
And you had a large staff and
It was a fairly large operation, yes. And then we started to get the transistor coming in.
Okay.
And
Texas Instruments, or am I wrong? Or were they?
Well, Texas Instruments was very much involved with the early days, and then IBM started building its own transistorized.
Can you remember when you first heard that and what the implications were in terms of what you were doing?
I don't really remember.
Okay. That is a major transition.
Oh yes, because it allowed. It set us on a completely different path of being able to miniaturize things.
Yeah, and it's ending up now with all our nanotechnology and things like that.
It's so small now.
I know. We're going down to carbon-60 now. They're going to be. But anyway, go ahead. Yeah.
And so I spent in IBM. IBM used to be known as I've been moved.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
And so I had various opportunities in IBM, and so I did a variety of jobs in IBM, primarily being a manager in the areas with developing new applications,
right?
And encouraging use of computers.
Now that was long before they even contemplated the PC or anything. This was all mainframes, or
this was all mainframe,
and it was business.
Well,
and it was somebody made a thing about he thought there was a market for 4 computers in the whole world or something.
Yeah, it's never quite sure whether that was really said. But I was more involved with supporting scientific applications, although I had some what we called cross-industry applications that I was responsible for. But so that was really my early career, and then things took off, and I ended up at Columbia University, where we put in literally thousands of PCs.
Yes.
And massive telecommunications facilities, and now, as I say to people, I retired in 1991, and it's been about 3 generations since then.
I know.
And I have to find a grandchild to tell me
how to make the
how
computer
to do
work.
things.
Oh, I know what you mean very well on that. Seems to me that's all I do, and we're trying to figure out how some gadget can be programmed. We didn't have any as just general citizens. Anything you had to program. If it's a certain engineer, some people are very adept at thinking that way or working with things like that. But The VCRs were all flashing 12 in America. They would get them out of the box, put them up, and people couldn't figure out how to program the damn thing. Now you got a whole generation of young people who seem to just pick it up almost at their mother's knee, being able to work somewhat with the computer. That's a function of them getting simpler. And your user interfaces that made it simpler. There was, and then technological developments are going on in the background that made it possible. And it's a major positive development that is part of the human condition as you look back over your life and the time between when you first got started and now, right?
Yeah, it's really two things going.
Okay.
One is that computers, the human interface has gotten easier.
Yeah,
although
thank
I think
goodness.
there's a lot still to be done.
Yes, indeed.
And the other is that my grandchildren, I think, started at the age of 2 or 3, playing games with a computer.
Right.
And so they're familiar with it, and they, get the feel. I mean, I remember someone in my family, I won't pin it down on them, his comment to me a few years back was, "Oh, Dad, you'll never learn that," when I was having trouble programming a VCR.
Yes, right.
I was just too old to learn that sort of thing.
It's true, it really is. A good book is somewhere the children shall lead us. Sometimes I think it's the case. You see a 10-year-old playing a computer like Vladimir Horowitz plays the piano. Yeah. And they all know that the Zorch connects to the Zilch and everything. And I'm at sea often, but that's okay. And it's very encouraging that they have picked it up so well.
Yeah. Oh. Now, I mean, the rate of change has been tremendous.
It's just almost exponential.
I mean, if you look back, just my father was old when I was born because I was part of his second family. But he had been born in 1872. Yes. And based his career basically on telegraphy. And the first flight was, 1904?
That's right. It's all coming in.
And then my mother was born, my mother was younger than my father, was born in 1893, 293. And so she was 11-year-old before the first flight. But by the time before she died, she had been flying, jets across the Atlantic to see her grandchildren.
Yeah, it's really true. It's all going away. 200,000 years we've been here, and it going like this, and it's all just going almost exponential now. This is a time of qualitative transformation, I think.
It really is, and I think this was the theme, in a way, of the course I used to teach at Columbia University on computers and society.
You were, okay.
Because, and I tried to teach this course once a year or so in the engineering school, and trying to inoculate the students with some, maybe skepticism, maybe skepticism is not the right word, some realism in terms of they had a very powerful tool they were learning to use, but it had social consequences which were possibly tremendous. Okay. And this has been something that's interested me all the way through my career of, what is the impact of technology on society?
Huge subject.
It is an enormous subject, and one in which, unfortunately, we can be seduced very easily by technology because we get tremendous benefits from it, and we sometimes forget the hazards that go along with it. I mean, for example, I was just reading an article a few weeks ago about the possibility of putting chips in sneakers.
Okay.
And the article commented that one father said this would have been so great when his son apparently went missing in school. They could have tracked where he was by the chip in his shoes.
They're thinking of putting chips in people.
And now,
or in creatures.
Yeah, but what does this do with this whole sense of privacy?
Yeah.
What is privacy is a good question.
Yes, it is.
But the idea of putting chips in shoes, if you take your
much less people.
Yeah, take your cell phone. It's possible to track where you are, but from your cell phone.
Helps echelon out a great deal to keep track of everything.
And it's
particularly if you've got problems with the the government is,
Yeah,
keeping tabs on things.
and if you listen to Law and Order on TV,
Yeah.
they manage to track people by their telephones and things. I mean, it's just so much easier if you can know, if you add GPS to a cell phone and you can tell that Chana was at 59th and Broadway at 2 p.m. on such and such a time.
Yes.
And this is, in some sense, good. You can track stray children, but equally, as a tool, it can be misused.
It can be very oppressive.
It can be oppressive.
In the wrong hands, in the wrong context. Yeah.
And I think we have to be very careful of this sort of thing. And it can be intrusive. After I talked about this at Columbia a few weeks ago, I got one of the attendees.
Is this something you want to show?
No, I don't. I just like to read it.
Okay, good.
This is a letter received by a retired faculty member at Columbia.
Okay.
Dear Carol, it's from Starbucks Coffee.
Okay.
Dear Carol, please enjoy the enclosed Barnes & Noble card loaded with $5. Use it to treat yourself to anything at Barnes & Noble stores, including Starbucks Coffee. Or if it's more convenient, you can use your card online at bn.com. It's our way of thanking you for purchasing Starbucks coffee when you buy groceries. So obviously, the only way that this could have been determined was a supermarket
knew that she had,
recording, using. I'm sure she used a credit card or one of these
debit cards,
or one of these courtesy cards at the supermarket. They recorded that she had been buying Starbucks coffee,
and it all goes into the database.
It all went into the ad piece. And this was.
Then they pumped it out.
Pumped it out so that they could get this letter just to people who had.
I remember I saw Marshall McLuhan one time talking about this. The guy, and he said that they're going to be able to make as many. They can keep tabs of things, and he did one thing where he said they could make as many. Mr. Ford once said, you can have any Ford color of your car as long as it's black. He said you can now. They're getting to where they can do it. And they can have it be all kinds of variations in terms of the design or the color of things like that, and at no extra cost because of some of the cyber possibilities. So that's an advantage. That's the thing that can be done, keeping track of things. And there are advantages to be seen by having that kind of information available to somebody making a good or a service or any kind of...
Okay, let me pose a service. You've got a cell phone.
Yeah.
You're walking down the street.
Right.
And you pass... well, let's use Starbucks.
Okay, why not?
Well, I have nothing against Starbucks.
Lions. They're like lions. Were
so you go past Starbucks and your phone rings. And it says, oh, Howard...
why don't you
go in and have a cup of coffee?
Yeah, right. Or they could have it wired right to your head. They're going to
Well, I haven't gone that far. But this focused advertising is
targeted,
something targeted advertising. Call it what you will. I think is something that is I regard as a gross intrusion.
Okay.
Now the advertisers, of course, say
think it's a bonanza.
Yeah. And this whole question of what's called data mining, is you go through people's history as much as can be collected, and a heck of a lot is collected.
Yeah.
Now, if you're like me, use your credit card for virtually everything.
Yeah.
I mean, I get airline miles, and so I make trips for next to nothing.
Yes.
But I pay for it. I've now got a history.
Sure. Yeah.
And
it follows you everywhere you go.
And that's very valuable. And
very valuable to you. It's very valuable to marketers.
Well, it's more valuable to the marketers than it is to me.
Well, you got okay.
And,
you got some advantage.
Yes, I mean
over that it would have just gone all wasting in the past. You would have now you got those. There is a, if I could go to a metaphor. It's dangerous to go biological metaphor. It's a thing I use often. There are in a human organism, it's staggering to me, 100 trillion cells in the human organism.
Yeah, something like that.
100 trillion. And they're all overlaid with DNA. And there is a systems efficiency that and if one goes bad, that could be cancer. but all the cells matter, and all the cells get what autonomically often they need in order for the system to operate. And that's sort of a model that's a little dangerous. It sounds a little fascistic and so forth, but it could be that if you have a society where we do not have a just system in the world yet. We may be getting to one in terms of being able to realize our capability of having a just system for each of the individual cells. If you were to say each of the individual human beings, they're all subject to pressures and injustice and things like that. But the thing is, there are advantages to having systems efficiency for the operation of the overall system. You understand what I'm saying? And maybe it's a dangerous metaphor to be thinking about human societal organization.
Well,
but you understand what I'm getting at?
But I think that efficiency has its place, and maybe in a beehive. I don't know, but
well, or in a human organism.
Yeah, but we've got
that's within a system.
What makes us human? Are we really sort of? Do we really want to be controlled and everything determined? And I think this is of a danger in society when everything is known about you, that you really have very little, independence.
Sounds awfully like 1984.
That's right.
Or
And
Brave New World or something.
But there's always reasons for one of these things. I mean, look at, I don't want to get into a political discussion particularly, but you think about the Patriot Act.
Yes.
And what information is collected. Right now, and you can't correct it.
Yeah, we made a little joke about Echelon, but they're probably listening in on this.
Oh, maybe. I've said so many things in my life. But, the trouble is...
It's for the security.
It's
and
security.
for the good of the system and that kind of things they can say. And for efficiency. And it's important for us to have that information so the system can work right.
But it's...
if you call them market signals, even, maybe. Or
but it's information can be misinterpreted.
Absolutely, no doubt
I mean,
about
I always, one of the examples I used to give to my classes was that for a while I held a public office in the small community I live in, and on a Friday evening, twice a month, a police car would drive into my driveway and leave off a set of materials for the following Tuesday's meetings. And so as far as the neighbors were concerned, the police were showing a great deal of interest.
In that organization?
In
your activity?
In me. I mean, activity was the town board. So, I mean, that was but, again, to the casual observer, what was Bruce Gilchrist doing being visited by the police?
On such a regular basis.
On a regular basis.
Must have been a payoff or something.
Something, yeah.
That's right.
You can misinterpret.
Yeah, right.
And I think we've seen, plenty of evidence of this sort of thing in the files. I mean, I think Senator Kennedy was on a watch list for the aircraft, for loading in aircraft.
Yeah, it's been going on. I mean, they did it, I suppose, in the forum in Rome, but they did it at COINTELPRO, and they had these things, internal security acts and that kind of stuff. And there's a movie, Enemy of the State. Have you ever seen that movie?
No, I haven't.
That's a movie that's very worrying about the capability for an all-oppressive kind of information about everybody, knowing where everybody is.
But there are advantages to lots of the things, and I understand why the government introduces some of these things. We're currently involved, the government's involved in a debate on immigration.
Right. No.
And if we're not careful, we're going to have a system in which we have very close monitoring of all of us.
All of us. All 6 billion, perhaps.
Well, let's just worry about the United States. That in order to, if we're going to keep illegal aliens out, we're going to have to monitor virtually everybody in this country, because we have, maybe because you and I are non-Hispanic, we won't be affected as much. But
we're British even. We're WASP.
But, we've got a very significant Hispanic minority, many of whom are citizens. I have a relative through marriage who's been since the conquistadors came. So, I mean, he's Hispanic, but from the 1500s.
Right.
And so we really do.
Yeah.
And he's proud of his lineage and history, just the same as you and I should be proud of our history.
Right.
And we've got to balance control, which is so possible with technology.
Yeah, what can be done now is just staggering what they're able to do. Much less it's going every year. It's going almost exponential because it's going around the other side of the. And we've got things coming now. I heard you talk the other day that they're talking about terabyte.
Oh yes.
Computing.
Yep.
Computers. Yeah. Terabytes.
Everything that you have.
And it goes every year. It jumps. It's doubling every year. It's way beyond Moore's law. And
everything that you have done in your lifetime could be recorded and stored on what is currently now available.
And the availability is increasing almost exponentially.
Right.
So it's a huge issue about privacy and the need to know in order to have an efficient system. And it brings up elemental questions of justice and of efficiency and of how society is going to be organized, particularly since we have all of these institutions out of history which do not give a context of serving as a certain sense. Maybe 80%, 60% certainly of the world population is not able to be served by the system that's in place now.
Yes.
So there's revolutionary possibility that's in the air if we're going to get at a system where the system is really one where you're not going to be needing to be worried about that because you overcome the injustice that is part of the historical context out of which we're emerging, perhaps.
The whole concept of redemption
or liberation
is also there because, I mean, the classic expression was "Go west, young man."
That's right. There was a frontier, Mr. Turner told us. Yeah.
You could start afresh.
Yeah.
How many of us have said or written stupid things in our time?
I've done a lot.
Yeah, we all have. I mean, if we claim we haven't, we're
in serious.
We're in trouble.
We're liable for perjury.
No more should we hold politicians to early statements they made as teenagers.
Yeah.
But nowadays, so much is recorded. You can go on the web now and find things that kids have written, which they they wouldn't write as adults.
Right.
But why should that sort of stuff be retained?
Well, it's a very quick. We've only got. I'm sorry, we've run out of time. I knew we'd run out of time. It was so interesting, the historical development of all this and everything. But we come at a time where we have weapon systems that can wipe out the species for the first time since the evolution of human consciousness and so on. And we also have a tremendous capability of perhaps creating a world of. It's got a tremendous living support system that could be. We live at a time of incredible transformation. Whether we're coming into a new relationship to things in a cosmic sense or something, but it seems to me, whatever it is, a good part of it has to do with the computing and the computers and the development of these kind of things. And you've had a hand in that right from the beginning, and I really thank you for that. We could talk for about 16 hours on these issues.
It's been fun.
It has been fun. Bruce, thanks a lot.
You're very welcome.
I really appreciate it. We only just got started to scratch the surface on a huge subject, and I thank you very much for sharing some of this early history of it and so forth, and then also taking the implications, the serious implications of the organization of society as we begin to look ahead, taking all of that into account and the trends therein. And it's been your pleasure to have his perceptions. We invite you to tune in. We'll be coming back again tomorrow.